We are always trying to move our lives from unhappiness to happiness. Or we might say that we wish to move from a life of struggle to a life of joy. But these are not the same. Moving from unhappiness to happiness is not the same as moving from struggle to joy. Some therapies seek to move us from an unhappy self to a happy self. But Zen practice and perhaps a few other disciplines or therapies can help us to move from an unhappy self to no self, which is joy. To have a self means we are self-centered. Being self-centered and therefore opposing ourselves to external things, we are anxious and worried about ourselves. We bristle quickly when the external environment opposes us. We are easily upset. And being self-centered, we are often confused. This is how most of us experience our lives. Although we are not acquainted with the opposite of a self, no self, let's try to think what the life of no self might be. No self doesn't mean disappearing off the planet or not existing. It is neither being self-centered nor other-centered, but just centered. A life of no self is centered on no particular thing, but on all things. That is, it is non-attached, so the characteristics of a self cannot appear. We are not anxious, we are not worried, we do not bristle easily, we are not easily upset, and, most of all, our lives do not have a basic tenor of confusion. And thus to be no self is joy. Not only that, no self, because it opposes nothing, is beneficial to everything. For the vast majority of us, however, practice has to proceed in an orderly fashion, in a relentless dissolution of self. And the first step we must take is to move from unhappiness to happiness. Why? Because there is absolutely no way in which an unhappy person, a person disturbed by herself or himself, by others, by situations, can be the life of no self. So the first phase of practice should be to move from unhappiness to happiness, and the early years of Zazen are mostly about this movement. For some people, intelligent therapy can be useful at this point, but people differ and we can't generalize. Nevertheless, we cannot, nor should we try to skip over this first movement from relative unhappiness to relative happiness. Why do I say relative happiness? No matter how much we may feel that our life is happy, still, if our life is based on a self, we cannot have a final resolution. Why can there not be a final resolution for a life based on a self? Because such a life is based on a false premise, the premise that we are a self. Without exception, we all believe this, every one of us. And any practice that stops with the attempted adjustment of the self is ultimately unsatisfying. To realize one's true nature as no self, a Buddha, is the fruit of Zazen and the path of practice. The important thing, because only it is truly satisfying, is to follow this path. As we battle with the question of our true nature, self or no self, the whole basis of our life must change. To adequately wage this battle, the whole feeling, the whole purpose, the whole orientation of life must be transformed. What might be the steps in such a practice? The first, as I said, is to move from relative unhappiness to relative happiness. At best, this is a shaky accomplishment, one that is easily upset, but we must have some degree of relative happiness and stability to engage in serious practice. Then we can attempt the next stage, an intelligent, persistent filtering of the various characteristics of mind and body through Zazen. We begin to see our patterns, we begin to see our desires, our needs, our ego drives, and we begin to realize that these patterns, these desires, these addictions are what we call the self. As our practice continues and we begin to understand the emptiness and impermanence of these patterns, we find we can abandon them. We don't have to try to abandon them, they just slowly wither away, for when the light of awareness plays on anything, it diminishes the false and encourages the true, and nothing brightens that light as much as intelligent Zazen, done daily and in session. With the withering of some of these patterns, no self, which is always present, can begin to show itself, with an accompanying increase of peace and joy. This process, though easy to talk about, is sometimes frightening, dismal, discouraging. All that we have thought was ourself for many years is under attack. We can feel tremendous fear as this turning about takes place. It may sound enchanting as it is talked about, but the actual doing can be horrendous. Still, for those of us who are patient and determined in our practice, joy increases, peace increases, the ability to live a beneficial and compassionate life increases. And the life which can be hurt by the whims of outside circumstances subtly alters. This slowly transforming life is not, however, a life of no problems. They will be there. For a time our life may feel worse than before as what we have concealed becomes clear. But even as this occurs, we have a sense of growing sanity and understanding of basic satisfaction. To continue practice through severe difficulties, we must have patience, persistence, and courage. Why? Because our usual mode of living, one of seeking happiness, battling to fulfill desires, struggling to avoid mental and physical pain, is always undermined by determined practice. We learn in our guts, not just in our brain, that a life of joy is not in seeking happiness, but in experiencing and simply being the circumstances of our life as they are, not in fulfilling personal wants, but in fulfilling the needs of life. Not in avoiding pain, but in being pain when it is necessary to do so. Too large an order? Too hard? On the contrary, it is the easy way. Since we can only live our lives through our minds and bodies, there is no one who is not a psychological being. We have thoughts, we have hopes, we can be hurt, we can be upset. But the real solution must come from a dimension which is radically different from the psychological one. The practice of non-attachment, the growth of no-self, is the key to understanding. Finally, we realize that there is no path, no way, no solution, because from the beginning our nature is the path, right here and right now. Because there is no path, our practice is to follow this no path endlessly and for no reward. Because no self is everything, it needs no reward. From the no beginning, it is itself complete fulfillment.